Hello everyone, how are you doing today? Thank you for stopping by and joining me on today's story time. On today's episode, we're going to take some time to head out into the mountains and even the state parks. These places offer beautiful landscapes, but at the same time, they each hold many mysteries. What sorts of encounters will we have today? Listen in as we tell these stories. And just remember, I hope you can join me every single week for brand new videos, so make sure you have my notifications turned on. Lastly, if you would like to check out my social media, then make sure to join me there as well. Anyways, let's get our adventures started, shall we? Number 1. Hello there everyone. I just spent the last few hours remembering this story, and I thought I would go ahead and write it down for all of you. I'm currently 19 years old, but this happened about a year ago. Ever since this happened, I've had this bad feeling of going into the mountains, especially when it was dark outside. Looking back, it wasn't the smartest idea, but I was pretty naive back then. So with that, allow me to paint a picture for you. I live in Southern California, where my neighborhood lies right next to a state park. It was late October, and the sunset was normally around 6 p.m. So, one of the reasons I enjoyed going here was I enjoyed going to the top of the mountains. Here, you got an awesome sight. In my time out there, I normally encountered friendly people. Oftentimes, you would run into daytime runners, or even people on bicycles enjoying the beautiful outdoors. There were even a few times I saw coyotes and even a bobcat once, but they were way off in the distance. Even with all of that, I considered this state park like my home away from home. Okay, that's enough background information. This happened on a Friday afternoon after I'd come back from school. I was actually planning on going for a run the next morning, but at the last minute, I decided I would go ahead and get my running done today. Mistake number 1. Second mistake was telling no one where I was going. Though looking back, my mom and dad knew if they saw my backpack and I wasn't home, then chances are I was running or walking in the state park. That's where I find myself around 5 p.m. I started my normal routine of stretching, then began walking for about half a mile. Once I reached a crossroads in the trail, I decided to go down a different one. Now, normally I take this trail in the daytime, but for some reason I told myself to go there. Mistake number 3. I began the walk up this trail while running into a couple walking their dog. They were nice and reminded me about the sunset. I already knew that, but in my mind I figured I could go ahead and reach the top of the mountain, and I can get a sight of the valley below. Finally, after another 20 minutes, I reached the top of the small mountain, and thankfully, I got there just in time for sunset. It was beautiful, and I even posted the photos if you wanted to see them. What wasn't beautiful was what I would be experiencing there soon after. As I sat there for another 10 minutes, I started to become aware of some sounds. This mountaintop, if you want to call it that, has this field with trees and trails behind me. Really, I'm unable to see if anybody's going up the trail. If I walked over there, then chances are I could see them. I believe that's why I hadn't noticed the man that walked up here. You see, while I sat there listening to some music, this man that I want to say was in his late 40s walked up to the top of the mountain. He just stood there. He had long blonde hair and a ponytail and was wearing old-looking clothing. Not exactly somebody you would expect in the state park, but hey, whatever. I thought perhaps he was just another sightseer and I left it at that. More than anything, I did my best not to pay attention to him. As the minutes went by, I was expecting him to leave any time, but he just kept standing there. It's not like he was looking towards the sunset, which he did at first, but no, he kept looking towards me and talking to himself. I was starting to get a little bit concerned about it. I told myself it was now time to leave. As I got up to go, he ended up saying something. "Wonderful night, isn't it? Hey, you know what they say about being out here in the middle of nowhere, right? It's not exactly the smartest idea. You never know. There might be a stranger following you." I nervously laughed and I wished him a good evening. I was hoping that was the end of it, but it was about to get even worse. I'd say about 20 minutes later, I make it to the bottom of this mountain area, and I began the 2-mile walk back to the entrance. By this point in the afternoon, the sun had just set over the mountains, and the light from the valley was starting to slowly disappear. Of course, I've put the strange encounter from earlier behind me, mainly because I no longer saw him. Looking back to 20 minutes earlier, I just told myself he was joking or something. Well, as I'm about 10 minutes from the exit, I began to hear footsteps nearby. Obviously, I hadn't seen anyone anymore, but my first thought was perhaps the last few people were exiting the park. The thing is, as soon as I stopped, the footsteps did as well. I take a look behind me, but I don't see anyone. That was strange, I tell myself. Once again, I walk for another 30 seconds or so, and I'm able to hear the footsteps yet again. Same process of stopping, and the noises are doing the same. One thing was now for certain. Someone or something was nearby, and they weren't wanting to be seen. Immediately, I thought about the recent mountain lion encounter, and I started thinking about that. You see, there had been a story in the paper I read about. That mountain lion idea would soon be a distant memory, because what happens next, I would never forget. Seemingly out of nowhere, I see somebody step onto the trail just beyond the trees. It was hard to tell because it was dark in the valley, but I could see somebody start making their way towards me. I thought it was strange because it looked like the man from earlier, only this time, something was different. Now I could see the outline of something sharp in one of his hands. It doesn't take a genius to realize what he had, and that's when I take off running. As I do so, I can hear him behind me breathing heavily and laughing, but not like a normal person. All the meanwhile, I'm crying on the inside, and I'm thinking of the worst. I end up catching a break because in the short distance of running, I can hear as he trips over and falls on the ground. That was my chance. I'm thankfully able to get out of there before he catches up to me. Once again, I thought that was the end of it, but it wasn't. Obviously, I did report the incident to the park rangers, but nothing came of it. That was until a few months later. One day, while walking outside my house, I take one look towards the entrance of the state park. There, standing behind some trees, I saw somebody that looked like the man from my first encounter. Actually, I'm almost certain it was the same person. That was the last time I ever saw him around my area, and I haven't heard anything else since. I would like to be happy he wasn't around anymore, but something in my mind always tells me to keep a watchful eye. Not having a conclusion is what made me pretty paranoid, but like I said, nothing as of lately. Number 2. Let me go ahead and start off with some information. This happened around the early 2000s, when me and my girlfriend lived in the mountains. I want to call it a house, but it was more like a cabin. You know the ones. Anyways, our cabin was located near a national park, where oftentimes we would spend our time either walking around or camping. Honestly, the only real concerns we had were the occasional bear, but as long as we kept our distance, they would mind their own business. But that's besides the point. Because of the location of our home, you don't really expect to get any visitors. Actually, in the time we lived out there, the only people who would go out there were family members, but this was mainly during the summertime. Another thing was our area of land was fenced off, and you had to take a private road to get to our house. That is what made this entire thing so weird. Okay, so I'll go ahead and fast forward to the evening this took place. Like any young couple, we were both working. I worked at a small business center handling paperwork, while my girlfriend was a teacher in town. Because of our different schedules, we would oftentimes arrive home at different times. I normally was the one to get there last, but on this afternoon, I arrived earlier than expected. It's important to note that on this afternoon, we were going to have somebody work on our air conditioning unit, but we weren't expecting them until around 7 p.m. When I got home, it was around 4 p.m., and I went upstairs to take a nap. I want to say, around 6 p.m., I start hearing a series of knocking. Not at the door, mind you, but on the windows. My first thought was perhaps the air conditioning worker got there early, and he was trying to get my attention. I remember then getting out of my room and slowly heading over to the living room window. I always check the window first before opening the door. Well, in our driveway, I noticed an unmarked vehicle that had no license plate on it. It didn't look official, and I started to become more curious about it. Another thing was I was able to see the person at the door. Actually, they didn't even have the same uniform that you'd expect from them. It was the complete opposite. Anyways, my curiosity would increase now because suddenly the person says, "Hello, I know you're home. I hear you needed help with your television. I'm here to check it out. So why don't you open the door?" I don't know, but something about the way he said it definitely made me feel something else was going on. I, of course, acted like I wasn't home, and I ignored him some more. I know it doesn't sound too concerning, but I should explain something. During that year, there were a lot of stories of break-ins. A lot of people would disguise themselves as door salesmen or even repairmen, only to make their way inside people's houses. Though I was thinking about that at the time, I tried not to jump to conclusions. What made me realize something else was going on was when he started kicking at the door. That's when I grabbed my dad's baseball bat and I awaited the worst. Finally, after what seemed like a long time, I can hear the sound of the car start up and the noise just disappeared. It's now I happen to take a look out the window and I no longer saw the mysterious vehicle. Another 30 minutes went by, but only this time, somebody rang the doorbell. I checked the time and sure enough, it was 7 p.m. With one quick look out the window, I can see the repair vehicle and it had the name of the company on it. This time I go to open the door and I'm welcomed with a friendly smile. I let him inside the house and I explained what happened earlier. In the end, he told me he had no idea who the first person was and said they never sent anybody out earlier. But that's not the end of it. About a month later, I read in the paper of something similar happening. Only this time, the person at home wasn't there, and unfortunately for them, this stranger got inside. Looking back, I'm just glad I never opened the door and I ended up listening to myself. Number 3. This is something that happened about a month ago. For some quick background information, I live in a small town in Montana that's near a state park. For personal reasons, I won't say the name of the town, but I will say this. Nothing really happens here, and you rarely hear anything too serious happening. After what happened, I think otherwise. So on this day, I was feeling pretty bored at home. I have 2 younger sisters, but they were both in school at the time. That left me by myself. With my mom and dad not being home either, I thought perhaps I could go to the park. You see, I was in college when this took place, and something I did on my days off was go to take photographs. Before I left, I called my mom and I told her where I would be going. She didn't answer, so I left her a voicemail. "Hi, Mom. Just as a heads up, I'm going to the park today. I should be back around 5 p.m., so I'll help you get dinner started. I'm also going to bring Kevin with me, because I think he'll appreciate the walk too." Kevin was our 5-year-old golden retriever, and I took him anywhere I went, even to the park. With Kevin in one hand and the keys to my car in the other, I closed the door to the house, and I proceeded to my car. Before I ended up reaching the park, I drove into town and I got a few supplies from the store. It was here I grabbed some snacks as well as a couple of water bottles. Once I had everything I needed, we get back in the car and we make the half-hour drive to the other side of town. For the most part, the park looked pretty quiet as we entered the parking area. I did see a couple of park rangers who sat at a bench eating lunch. I went over to give them a friendly hello, and they said the same thing. Before I left, they told me that certain areas were still a bit muddy from the recent rain, so they just told me to be careful. With that advice in hand, me and Kevin go down the same familiar trails. Halfway through our walk, I was able to see the mud they were talking about. Sadly, the trail we'd normally take was pretty muddy, so we couldn't really go that way. Still, we were out here and we didn't want to waste the afternoon for nothing. After all, I didn't just drive over here for nothing. Instead, I ended up taking us down another trail, and this one went off the normal path. Looking back, I don't think that was a very smart idea to do. For starters, the area itself is very lonesome. Few people ever go out there, and I myself have never been to this part of the park before. Of course, with little knowledge of what was ahead of me, I wasn't sure what to expect. As I made my way down these twists and turns, the once familiar path from before was turning into this series of woods. It was while going down this trail for, I want to say, 20 minutes, I started to get this really weird sensation. I don't know. but I was feeling really nervous. It's like I had this feeling something really bad was going to take place, but I couldn't really explain why. What made it worse was I take one look towards Kevin, and he started letting out a low growling sound. Though weird to see him doing that, I figured I was just imagining things and we continued on a little more. Up ahead of me, I was able to see a small lake area, and you could also see an island in the middle. It was neat, so to calm myself down, I take my camera out of my backpack and I started taking some pictures. Kevin was pretty calm right now, so now I knew for sure I was just making a huge deal for nothing. Okay, well, fast forward a few more minutes. I sat down with Kevin as we ate some snacks and we take a look back at the pictures. While looking at some of the pictures I took in the woods, I noticed something in one of the photographs I took. I didn't really notice it on my first run through the library, but in a series of 2 pictures, I was able to notice a tall-looking individual, and they appear to be wearing a mask. I froze at that sight because I started to think about the noises from earlier. Instantly, I felt this cold air, and something was telling me I needed to leave. I don't think Kevin would have second-guessed it, because immediately, we both end up returning. As we're making our way back, Kevin started whining for some reason. From the times Kevin has done that, I know it's because he either saw something or he felt something was off. It was true. Just beyond the tree line, both of us were able to see what looked to be somebody, and they were stumbling around, and they matched the same person I saw in the pictures. We waste zero time leaving, and the first thing we do is we tell the park rangers from earlier. Don't worry, I promise it's going to get worse. See, nothing happened to me, but they told me they would keep a lookout. About a week later, there was a story in the paper. Apparently somebody in a mask got into somebody's campsite and they took their things. The person was eventually found, but that's not what gets to me. What gets to me is he had been seemingly following me around through the woods. I don't know if he had anything in store for me, but maybe since he saw my dog, he decided otherwise. Let's just say Kevin got extra treats after that. Number 4. Here is a memory I have from when I was a teenager. When this story takes place, I was in high school and a junior. This would make me 17 years old. We lived in a small town near the Rocky Mountains, where oftentimes I would spend my time in the woods. This was back in the late 90s, so we didn't rely on phones for fun. This was also during a time when many teenagers my age spent time staying out late and going camping. At least, that's how it was in my area. Speaking of areas, let me go ahead and tell you about where I lived. My family lived down a private road that went up into the mountains. This is where my family owned many acres of land, and we used it for farming and other necessities. For the house itself, it was your normal 3-bedroom house. We had a kitchen, attic, basement, and 2 small living rooms. My room was located on the 2nd floor where I had a window next to my desk. Any time I sat there, I could open the curtain and I could take a look out the front yard. That's besides the point. Because we were pretty much in the middle of nowhere, you would never really expect to have anybody show up, let alone at night. This is where I found myself on a cold, rainy afternoon. You see, on this very afternoon, I ended up staying home because I didn't really feel like going with my parents. They were going to a party, but knowing them, they take forever, and I wasn't about to just stay there the entire time and do nothing. Instead, I offered to stay behind with our pet cat. I would wait for them to arrive back. Both my parents left around 5 p.m. and they said they would be home late. Sweet, now I had the house for myself. Even so, that didn't mean I had an excuse for not doing my homework. I won't lie, I might have procrastinated on my homework a little bit, so now I had to look forward to doing that. Not exactly too fun, but it was what it was. After making myself some ramen, I sat down and commenced writing on my Windows 97 computer. My cat laid down next to me as I typed away with the sounds of the rain hitting the window. I want to say about half an hour later, I'm surprised by this random sound. You see, another thing I forgot to mention was the deck on our front porch. It was pretty old, so anytime somebody walked on it, it would make a bunch of noise. Because of the rain and the wind, I thought I was just hearing things, but I did hear the sounds of footsteps and walking. I take one look out the window, but I don't see anyone. What I do notice was my bicycle was missing. Normally, I kept it right beside a small shed next to our house, but it was no longer there. Before it had rained, I'd used it earlier, and I left it in the same spot like normal. Still, it was possible my dad moved it into the shed, so I had nothing to worry about, right? Wrong. That would be the first sign of something being off. Fast forward a couple of hours later. The rain was now coming down louder, and you could even hear the sound of thunder in the distance. It's now about 9 p.m., and I'm downstairs making myself a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. As I went over to the refrigerator to get some milk, I happened to take a look through the window. In an instant, I see what looks to be somebody in a hoodie, and they're quickly moving away. That was followed by the sounds of the deck. I froze at that sight. I knew for certain my parents weren't home. Even so, I wanted to double check, so I run to the living room and I wait the sound of the door opening. Minutes went by, and I heard nothing. So now I decided to get on the phone and call my dad. Hey Dad, I was just wondering, are you outside the house or something? No, son, we're still over at your uncle's house. Why? What's going on over there? I didn't know what to say next, but it was obvious my parents weren't the ones out there. I tell him about what I saw, and he told me he would send help over. Surely enough, about 20 minutes later, I see a cruiser pull up into my driveway. I now watch as an officer shows up, and I finally explain what's going on. Together, we take a walk around the house, and that's where underneath the deck, we find an older-looking gentleman. In summary, he was taken away, and soon I put the memory behind me. That was until the following morning. The officer called me from the other night, and he was thanking me for helping them out. Apparently, they'd been searching for this person for some time, and he was said to be dangerous. I don't know why he didn't try to get inside, but I'm just glad he didn't. In case you were wondering about the bicycle, I did end up finding it, but sadly, it was destroyed. I'm not sure if he was the one that did it, but sadly, I had to get a new one. Now, of course, it's been many years since that happened, but sometimes I do think about it. I don't know. What do you think? Number 5. This was something that happened that I find weird more than anything. Sure, it's not like many of the other stories here, but it's still one that has taught me so many different things, especially being aware of your surroundings. Another thing I was happy about was having my pet dog with me. If it wasn't for him, then chances are I wouldn't have noticed this person. Okay, so let's go ahead and explain where I was and what exactly happened. To set the scene, it all started on a typical Friday afternoon. This was in 2003, by the way. I just returned from taking a written exam and I'd arrived to my dorm room. Right as I entered, I was welcomed by my roommates Jennifer and Ashley. Both of them were watching TV with my pet dog. In the meantime, they were doing their nails. I went ahead and said hello to them, then walked over to the refrigerator to grab some water. This is when my pet dog Jessie walked over to me. Hi there, buddy. How you doing? So, what did you two want to do today? Any plans? Well, I'm going over to my mom's house, and Ashley here, well, she has to work. So much for going to dinner or something. I was sad because we rarely got the chance to do anything together, let alone have friend time. Still, that wasn't going to stop me from going and doing something on my own. So, do you have any plans tonight? Yeah, I think I'm gonna go ahead and head over to the state park. You remember the one, right? Remember that spot I took the two of you to? I know what you're talking about. It's that area in the mountains with the lake, right? Yep, that's the spot. I think I'll take Jessie with me and we can take some art supplies. Besides, I still need to finish my art project. With my plans set for the afternoon, I head on over to my room and get ready. Once I was ready, me and Jessie head on out to the parking structure. Before making the 20-minute drive over to the state park, I figured I could go pick up some food on the way. After all, that way I could enjoy it in the park. So we make our way over to a bakery where I picked up some soup and a sandwich. With food ready, we now make the drive on over, ready to enjoy the peaceful afternoon. Little did I know the experience that would be awaiting me. Eventually, we take the exit from the highway, and we make the drive on over to the entrance of the park. From here, we go down this back road, until we reached the spot I had mentioned. It was this spot towards the top of the field. That's where you had a view of the woods below you. Right next to us, you could find a lake with some benches for people to use. We exit the car and we make the 5-minute walk over to our usual spot. Once there, I take out my sandwich and soup, and me and Jesse proceed to enjoy the cool afternoon. So far, nothing out of the ordinary. It's now about 6 p.m., and I started to work on my drawing. I was working on this really beautiful mountain scene, so this place offered the perfect inspiration. I want to say about 30 minutes later, Jesse started letting out a growling sound. This was then followed by him continuously staring towards the wooded area. I did notice it, but I tried my best to ignore it. Another few minutes of noise go by, and I was starting to get annoyed. Note that by this point I was already wrapping up for the afternoon, as it was starting to get dark. It was while in the process of getting up to leave, I noticed this person step out from the woods. He was still a fair distance away, but he seemed to be an older-looking gentleman and appeared to have a backpack on him. Okay, well, chances are he's out here enjoying the afternoon. Though it was rare, it wasn't unheard of to see somebody in this part of the park. As I'm making my way back to the car, Jesse is making all these sounds, almost like he was trying to warn me about something. I had my CD player with me and I was listening to music, so I wasn't really paying attention too much. It was while in the process of putting things in the back of the car, Jesse started barking like crazy. He was already inside the car, by the way. This was when I finally take a look behind me, and that's when I see him. Yes, it's the stranger from a few minutes ago. Only this time, he has a crowbar for some reason. I wasn't sure what he needed that for, but I soon find out. Seemingly out of nowhere, he says, "I found you," and starts heading over to me. That's when I put two and two together, and quickly I jumped into the car. As I'm starting the car, I hear this loud sound at the back. Turned out he had broken the window. Yeah, not exactly the nicest thing to do. Anyways, we finally started the car, and we drive out of there and we stop at a nearby convenience store. I ended up calling AAA after that, and we ended up getting the window repaired. As for the stranger, I don't even know, but one thing's for certain, had Jesse not been there, this story would have turned out a lot differently. Number 6. It seems that for some reason that everybody loves when I tell this story. I laugh at it now, but during the entire experience, I was legitimately thinking it was the end. So let me get started. I'm currently living in Alaska in the mountains, right by a set of woods. Oftentimes I'm out here on my own, but on this weekend, my brother James ended up visiting me. Up until that point, I hadn't seen him in a few years, so it was nice to finally be able to catch up. So with my brother around, we often spent many of the afternoons walking around in the nearby woods. It was here I took him to all my favorite spots. One time I even took him to go see the glaciers. It was truly beautiful, and I think even he was left speechless, but that's besides the point. The weekend my brother was set to leave had finally arrived, and we sat in the house pretty much bored out of our minds. It being summertime, you would expect us to go out some more, but he had gotten ill with a cold. Still, my brother was feeling up to it, and told me if I wanted to go do something on my own, that I could. I felt bad because I didn't want to leave him alone, but he told me not to worry about it. After all, he told me that if he really needed something, he could just call the neighbors that live further down the mountain. It took him convincing me some more, but eventually I went ahead and take his offer. I told James I would go into the woods for the night, but I would return the next morning. Looking back, not the smartest thing to do. For starters, the phone reception up here isn't exactly the best. Whenever you go into the woods, you'll be lucky if your message even gets through. Well, I did mention it was summertime, right? With a backpack of supplies, I make my way down some familiar trails. Everything was going normal for the most part. You see, there was this one area further up in the mountains that I wanted to go ahead and check out. Up here you could find a small cave and a spot that gave you a perfect view of the mountains around you. That was my destination, and so after about half an hour, I happened to stumble upon my favorite spot. It was here I set up a small tent and campsite, and I got a campfire going. Once done with that, I sat back and take in the view all around me. It was a cool 50 degrees at this point in the afternoon, but even then, the sun was still out. Even at 8 p.m., it looked like it was 12 in the afternoon. I guess that was one good thing about living all the way up here. Anyways, after a nice warm meal, I throw everything into a container and place it away from my tent. Word of advice, if you're ever going to go camping in the mountains or even the woods, make sure that you put your leftovers as far away from your campsite as possible. It's funny I knew this, but in all my excitement, I'd forgotten about this number one rule. Either way, I settled into the tent and I take a book out to read. This was something I always do before I go to sleep. Finally, around 10 p.m., I'm starting to get pretty tired. Now I go ahead and turn my lantern off and I try to get some sleep. I want to say about an hour and a half later, I was awoken by the sounds outside of the tent. Great. Somebody found my campsite, and now they were trying to take what I had. Looking back, I'm not sure if that would have been better. You see, I sat there listening for a few moments until I started to realize what it was I was hearing. Remember how I talked about moving your leftovers from the campsite? Yeah, I guess I could have done a better job at that. Outside, I'm able to hear the sound of a bear walking around, and they're checking out what I had. Soon enough, I could hear the sound of him eating the leftover food I had out. All I'm hoping for is that he would get bored and leave soon. Don't get me wrong, I love bears, but the last thing I wanted to do is go say hello. Against everything I normally tell myself to do, I quietly open the tent and I reveal what looked to be a younger bear. I wouldn't say he was that large, but large enough that I didn't want to startle him. I watched for what seemed like hours until he finished and started walking around some more. It's now I grab my lantern in one hand and I wait for what could possibly happen. I mean, what else was it going to do? Finally, it seems he loses interest and he ends up leaving. I waited there for what seemed like another hour before I figured he had left. Immediately, I grab my backpack and I get out of there. I ended up leaving the tent there, so I didn't have to waste any more time. I guess I didn't mind letting him have it. Anyways, I make it back home just fine, but you can imagine the surprise on my brother's face. I recount the experience, and you can bet he laughed a little bit. Still, he knew it was a serious situation, and it could have turned out worse. So yes, that was my encounter. Number 7. I've shared this story with a few friends, but I haven't actually taken the opportunity to share it with everyone. Now it's the time I feel it's perfect to tell all of you about it. I grew up about 45 minutes outside of a national park in Utah. It seemed like every other weekend, me and my girlfriend would make the hour trip there. Here we enjoyed camping, walking, and sightseeing. One of the many passions we had was photography, and this is why we often went out there. We both run a photography company, so it was no surprise we ventured out there so much. One of these adventures would end up being a little bit different than most. Although, let's be honest, it wasn't just a little bit different. Here's how it went. Me and my girlfriend, who we will call Bryn for this story, were just leaving the national park. As it turned out, we ended up underestimating the weather, and we had gotten caught in the rain. Unfortunate, but thankfully we did come prepared. Although it did take us longer than usual to leave the park, one thing we were happy about was that we could spend time together like this. It honestly didn't matter if it was raining. As long as the two of us were together, then it was fine. Sorry, I'm getting sidetracked. Moving forward. About 30 minutes of walking in the rain, we finally arrived back to our car. First thing we noticed was this note on the windshield. I was curious about this because I thought perhaps we had gotten a ticket or something. That was strange, I told myself. None of the other cars had any notes on them. The note was in a small plastic container, so naturally I opened to reveal what it said. All it said was this: "It has become apparent to us that you ended up reaching a spot in the woods you weren't supposed to see. I hope we'll see you soon. Until then, take care." Okay, let's stop right there. Before continuing on, it's important to add to this story that while me and Bryn were in the national park, we happened to stumble upon this abandoned-looking cabin. It was a strange sight, but we ended up seeing what it had to offer. The only reason I forgot to bring it up was because I was trying my best to avoid mentioning it. Well, inside the cabin, we found a couple of backpacks and what looked to be money. We weren't exactly sure what this was all about, but we weren't about to stay around and find out. Okay, now back to where we were. So why was this message on our car? Not sure why, but something happened soon after that made us think both things were related. As we started to exit the parking area, we both noticed headlights driving out of the nearby woods. Strange seeing as all these cars were in the parking lot, but perhaps it was a park ranger or something. I stopped thinking they needed to go by me, but instead, they just stopped behind our car. Weird, I thought, but we continue on to the main road. As I'm doing so, this other car is following the same motions as me. If I moved over to one lane, they would do the same. If I stopped, they would as well. To test my idea, Bryn ended up coming up with a brilliant idea. I know. Why don't we get off the highway and make a bunch of turns on the street? Surely they won't do the same, right? She was a genius, I tell you. Well, she did have a degree in teaching, but that's besides the point. I decided to take her advice, and immediately we get off the main highway. We take the exit 34A and proceeded to go down this lonesome road. Sadly, there didn't seem to be any sort of town, so making a bunch of turns was out of question. It seemed the further we kept on driving, the more we were heading out into the middle of nowhere. This was turning bad, and for starters, I needed to fill up the car soon. I gave ourselves probably about an hour left until we needed to make a stop. Mind you, this entire time, this strange-looking vehicle is staying a fair distance away. There was some bad news ahead. The road seemed to be coming to an end, and it headed off into the desert. We end up reaching the end of the road, and now we're forced to make a decision. The best decision was to turn around and get out of there, but this time, I was the one with the plan. We would turn the car around and wait until they got close enough. If they so happen to get out of their car, then we can wait until they got close, then make our great escape. It seemed that did the trick, because as they started to get closer, they slowed down until eventually they came to a stop. We now both watched as two people dressed in matching dark attire stepped out and started to walk over to us. Both had baseball bats. Sure, if you two wanted to play baseball, we could do that. Let me just go get my uniform from the back of the car. Yeah, how about no? We had both our windows down, so I could hear one of them saying, "You know, the two of you should have stayed away from our cabin, but since you're out here, let's play a game." It was something along those lines. Well, I go ahead and wait until they got closer, and just like that, we are out of there. I think I might have surprised them because it took them a while to react. Eventually, we had put some distance between us, and that's when we start seeing some lights up ahead. In the distance, we are able to see some red and blue lights as they're now making their way to us. We go to the side of the road until the officer stops. He puts the window down, and he wants to know if we had seen an older-looking Honda. Of course, it seemed the description he gave matched the one of our new friends from earlier. He thanks us, and then he drives away. You can imagine how confused we were about the entire thing, but we ended up getting back home later than expected. It's been almost 7 years since this happened, and we never did find out more about it. Also, I still have the note in case anybody is interested in seeing it. Number 8. I'm 16 years old, and myself, like many fellow teenagers, love being able to stay home alone. There is just something so fun about having your parents at work while you got the chance to do whatever you wanted. With it being a week off in November, this meant going to sleep at 3 in the morning and waking up at 12 in the afternoon. Along with this, I would play video games, watch movies, and eat all the snacks I wanted. Looking back now that I'm in college, it was quite the life. Still, there was one time in particular that would end up changing my love and joy for staying home alone. For starters, the location. Before I moved out for college, I was living at home with my parents in Big Bear, California. If you live here, or you've ever been here before, then you know just how wonderful it is. The greatest attractions here are the woods and lakes, and I was fortunate to have both near my house. My house was located at the very end of our street, so if anyone ever went down our street, they would use our driveway to turn around. That's an important detail to the story. So, like any mountain town, you can expect it to get pretty cold and dark, especially in the winter months. This is where we are in late November, and I remember me and my dad were just starting to put decorations up. We spent a couple of days getting everything ready, and finally on the 1st of December, all of our lights were set up. It was so awesome, and I couldn't wait until the end of the month to open the presents. Well, as it so happens, like with any parent's work, both my mom and dad were working extra during this time of year. This is where I found myself home alone one evening. I remember it being just after school had let out for winter break, and I returned home to an empty house. More than anything, I was so excited to finally get 3 weeks off from school, and once again, I was able to do what I wanted. I told myself what better way to start the vacation than by ordering a pizza. That's what I ended up doing, and this is where things got weird. I made the order per usual, but when I stepped outside to throw the trash away, I noticed someone. You see, in order to get into my backyard, you had to go through a side entrance. That's where you open a small fence. As I walked over to the side of the house, I noticed this person I'd never seen before. He was looking around, almost like he was trying to get inside my backyard. This is when I put my grown-up voice and I ended up saying, "Hey, what do you think you're doing here? Leave, now." That seemed to do the trick, but even so, I did find this a bit weird. Why was this guy just walking around back here? I should mention this was the first time I'd ever seen him before. Eventually I settled in and the pizza arrived about 20 minutes later. While paying for the food, the pizza delivery man told me, "Hey, do you know that man who's trying to open your back window? Because I don't know, it sure seems weird to me." I was unsure what he was talking about, but we both walked over to the side of the house. There he was again, only this time he was trying to open the window. It was now I'm on the phone, and I'm telling him he has to leave now, or he would be in trouble. Again, he ends up just running down the alleyway until officers arrive shortly after. They couldn't find him, but they said they would keep checking out the area. In the meantime, they just told me to keep the doors and windows locked. No need to tell me twice. Sadly, when all was said and done, my pizza got cold. But they were nice enough to bring me another one, so that was nice. Anyways, after all of that, I finally put the encounter behind me, and I settled in to watch a movie. By now, the delicious pizza had been finished, and I was a couple of hours into my movie marathon. It's now about 8 p.m., and I was expecting my parents home within the hour. With mom and dad on the way, I needed to clean up the living room so they wouldn't get mad at me. Still, I was somewhat worried about what happened earlier, so I didn't exactly want to go outside. I had no choice, so I act as brave as I could, and I step outside. Side note, I hadn't told my parents about what happened yet. They would be in for quite the surprise. Another side note, the trash bin was at the front of the house. I moved it there since trash day was tomorrow. While throwing the pizza box away, I take one look behind me, and that's when I saw movement at the side of the house. I focused more, and guess who I thought I saw? Remember that visitor from earlier? Well, he's back. This time, instead of shouting or yelling, I make my way over to the other side of the street. That's where I hide behind a tree. It's now I make another phone call, and soon my officer friends from earlier showed up. When all was said and done, they found him in the kitchen eating my food, and he of course was taken away. Apparently he said he was a repairman, and he was going to work on the sink. I guess he must have gotten hungry, and he made himself a sandwich or something. Anyways, once my parents got home, you can just imagine their surprise. It's now been 3 years since that happened, but it's made me more aware of my surroundings, especially when I'm home alone. Number 9. Looking back on this now, it may not be as serious as the others, but unless you were in my shoes, then you wouldn't have known how it felt like. Here's how it went. On this night, I just finished watching a movie with my best friend Nancy. Both of us were in college, and we were looking for a spot to enjoy some food. While thinking about what we wanted to do after the movie, I told her about this awesome sandwich shop that was on the other side of town. Normally it was pretty busy, but I promised her it was worth the wait. Needless to say, about an hour later, we had our sandwiches in hand. Now we needed to figure out where we wanted to enjoy them. That was when I remembered this spot in the state park that offered a great parking area, and a view of the mountains. With a plan ready, we make a 20-minute drive down the highway and exit towards the state park. Once we took a series of back roads, we reached the spot I had mentioned. Just so you know, it was around 5 p.m. at the time, and there was a light fog starting to form. It had just rained a few hours ago, but even so, the weather was lovely. So we sat there for about an hour, just talking about school and what we had planned for the weekend. That's until it was time to leave. Before we left, Nancy stepped out of the car and went to throw the trash away at a nearby trash bin. As she was doing so, I became aware of movement in the fog. It was hard to tell at first, but I could see the outline of a few things moving. I ignored it at first, but soon I realized what had been walking there. It wasn't people, but instead it was a group of wolves. Now, if it's one thing I know about them, it's you don't want to get them angry. I wasn't sure what to do. Do I yell out to my friend and warn her, thus startling them and causing them to run? Or do I stay calm and say nothing? I chose the second option, and I waited for her to make her way over to the car. Once she made it inside, I immediately locked the door, and I let out a sigh of relief. What's wrong? Why do you look so nervous? It's like you saw a group of wolves or something. Yeah, how funny was that? Basically, I tell her to turn around, and she lets out a nervous laughter at what she saw. Just like I mentioned, a group of wolves walked over to where she had thrown the trash away. Nothing else happened after that, but it did make me wonder, what could have happened had they chosen to act differently? I guess we'll never know, but for now, that's it. Number 10. This is a short story on the experience me and my friend Christine had while camping. This was in a national park. It's not too serious, but you could imagine we thought otherwise in that moment. Me and Christine were on our last day of a 3-day camping adventure in the park. During our time there, we took the opportunity to take pictures and enjoy the peace and quiet of the nature around us. Well, on the last day, we ended up noticing something that was sort of odd. We had spent most of the day walking around, but when we returned to our campsite, we found a note that was on our tent. It was weird since the only people we had seen was the other night, but they told us they were just about to leave. Either way, I opened the note to find a phone number, and there was a name that said John. Christine thought it was weird to see this and told me we should just throw it away. I was more of the curious one, so I decided to call it. Of course, they don't answer, so it goes straight to voicemail. In case you're wondering, no, I don't end up leaving a message. Fast forward to later that night. Seemingly out of nowhere, my phone started to ring. Confused, I take a look at my phone, and I see an unfamiliar number. I figured it was just a wrong number, so I let it go to voicemail. Soon I forget about it until Christine mentioned the call. I guess now she was the curious one. I take a look at the number on the note and on the phone, and now I notice both of them matched. It was now obvious. It must have been this John person. I now played the message, and it said, "Hello there. I see you found the note I left at your campsite. I just wanted to say that both of you are so beautiful. It's such a shame the two of you are out here alone. Who knows what sorts of people might be waiting for you." Yeah, talk about strange. Both me and Christine froze when we heard that message, but something else that got to us was the sounds of footsteps outside. We both sat there listening, unsure of what we could possibly do. Finally, after a few minutes, we hear somebody laughing, and then they're running away. We didn't know what to do, but one thing we knew was this: we had to leave, now. Quickly, I get on the phone and I call the park ranger's office we had seen earlier. I tell them about our location, and they arrived within 10 minutes. With their help, we were able to leave and get out of there. And that was that. We are unsure if the noises that night were related to John, but just like that, he was forgotten about. He never did call us again, and I ended up deleting the number. A few months later, I had heard about something similar happening to somebody else, but again, it was the same thing. It was a mystery in town, and so far nobody has been able to solve it. I'm not sure who this John person is, but I hope I never do have to meet them, or let alone hear their voice again. Hi there. It appears you made it to the end of our stories. So, What did you think? Which one was your favorite? Let me know down below. And as always, I thank you for spending some time here with me. I hope you'll join me next time. In the meantime, if you like some more stories, then check out the other Storytime episodes I have up. I've got an awesome variety, and I know you're going to enjoy them. But until then, my friends, have yourself an amazing day, and I'll see you on our next adventure. Take care.